These are the top 5 mistakes nature photographers make and how to fix them. Hi, I'm Juan Pons, and thank you for joining me once again on another video. In this video, I want to talk to you about the top 5 mistakes that I have seen nature photographers make when out in the field. I've been a professional photographer for about 20 years and have been teaching photography for over 16 years. And over the years, I have seen a lot of nature photographers, including myself, make these mistakes. Actually, just recently, I was in Mount Rainier National Park, and that's what prompted me to do this video, because I did see nature photographers making these mistakes over and over out in the field. Let's take a look. Mistake number 1, not moving around. I have seen this over and over again, and I saw it just now when I was in Mount Rainier National Park. A bunch of photographers got to a location. Each one claimed their own little space along this side of a beautiful location called Reflection Lakes, and not one of them moved around at all during the 2-hour period that we were all there. I was going crazy, moving from location to location, trying different angles, trying different perspectives, but not one of them moved. They took the same picture over and over and over again. To me, it was maddening. So, what's the advantage of moving around, and why should you move around? First is because you gain a different perspective from every location that you're in. For us, nature photographers, we can ask our subjects, in most cases, mountains and trees and whatnot, or wildlife, to move and get on position, the position that we most prefer. But what we can do is we can move ourselves. We can move from one location to another, maybe sometimes an inch or two, maybe it's 5 feet, maybe it's 50 feet. But moving gives us a different perspective on all of our subjects. It actually arranges a lot of elements in our scene differently. We can actually position one element next to each other because we're moving, because of perspective. We're moving ourselves in relation to our foreground elements and in relation to the background elements. So it makes a humongous difference. One of the most important things for me is also that this keeps me engaged with my subject. I'm not just merely sitting there chit-chatting away. I'm there to work. I'm there to make images. So I want to be engaged with my subjects, with the location that I'm shooting. So moving around, looking closely at my subjects makes a big difference in the images that I'm able to capture. And also, what I have found is that when you get home and you load these images into your digital darkroom, you start working the images, more often than not, you are surprised with which image ends up being your favorite of the bunch. When you're on location, you're looking through a camera, sometimes it looks really different when you come back and look at this on a nice larger screen. I'm going to show you a couple of examples here and a case in point. So let's move over to Lightroom here real quick. And I'm going to talk to you about the images I made on this recent trip to Mount Rainier National Park. When I first got there, there were 1 or 2 photographers, and I found a location that I wanted to shoot, or that I thought I wanted to shoot, and I think that's the one that you're seeing here on the screen. That was my initial location. But as the morning went on, I moved from location to location, trying to get different perspective of my subject, trying to align my foreground elements with the reflection of Mount Rainier in the background. As the morning went on, more and more photographers came in. They kind of sat in their location and they didn't move. That was also kind of rude because it made it difficult for people to try different vantage points and different perspectives. They wouldn't move. They would stay there and kind of claim that spot as their own. And it's a loss for them, because being able to move and gain different perspectives are oftentimes provide you with more options and better images. So for example, this is the first image that I shot. I can see the reflection. I see some of the flowers in the foreground, as well as some of the vegetation that's kind of doing a nice framing job on my entire scene. A little later on, I moved. Wanted to try a different perspective. So I moved over to this location with some more flowers that are kind of more prominent in my foreground. and my whole image is framed by two groups of evergreens. Nicely framed. I kind of like this perspective, but I kept looking, and in the end, this was the last spot that I shot from. And in the end, this turned out to be my favorite perspective because of the way my foreground frames the reflection on the lake and on and the mountains. I still have a lot of those wildflowers in the foreground to add some color and some depth. But I had not seen this until the very end. And the fact that I moved around and kept looking for different perspectives made a huge difference. In the end, I think I created a better image than I would have had I gotten to the location, picked up my spot, and not moved for the entire morning. So move around. You'll be surprised as to just sometimes moving a couple of feet or even sometimes inches makes a big difference in the images that you're creating. Okay, let's take a look at mistake number 2. And that is not keeping your camera level. This is easy to do, especially when we're shooting off angle. I do this quite often. This is a problem that I have in that if I'm shooting handheld, especially, my horizons tend not to be straight. So I need to work hard and think about this very hard, especially because oftentimes I'm not shooting straight up. I may be kneeling down, or maybe laying down on the ground, or I may be shooting a little off angle or off kilter. So it's really easy to get off your horizon if you're not paying attention. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's no big deal. I can go ahead and crop in Lightroom or in Photoshop after the fact when I get home. And yes, you can definitely do that, but what happens is when you do crop, you may end up losing some image area. You may end up with a suboptimal composition, if you will, because you were forced to crop out the image and crop out parts of the image that you didn't really want to or mean to crop. So that's why I like to get it out, do it right out in the field. Now, the best way that you can ensure that you keep your camera level, for me, is to have, I should mirrorless. So for me, having the rule of thirds grid on my viewfinder or on the back of the camera helps me a lot to make sure that my subject is nice and level, whether it's aligning those horizontal lines with a horizon or aligning a vertical line with a tree or some other structure that's supposed to be vertical. That helps a lot in keeping my camera straight. The other thing that you can use is that you can use the built-in levels that are electronic levels that are in most cameras nowadays. Some of the times you can look at them through the viewfinder. Sometimes you have to look at them on the back of the camera. But ensure that you turn those on and that you use them. Now, if you're shooting from a tripod, oftentimes a tripod will have a bubble level on it, on the head, that you can use to level the camera. I still prefer to use the one inside the camera, the electronic levels. But, if you don't have one, if you have an older camera that doesn't have one, because most modern cameras have one nowadays, you can certainly use the one that's on the tripod. Let's take a look at a couple of examples here. This is the first one. This is an image that I shot in Sri Lanka. And I was shooting handheld. It was early in the morning, as you can see, as the sun rising, peeking out through the horizon and the clouds. And I think, if I remember correctly, I was kneeling down on one knee on the sand as the waves were coming in and washing over me. And as you can see very clearly, my horizon was definitely not level. Now, again, this is easy to correct, right? In Lightroom, I can go in and level my horizon, but that's going to force me to crop the image. In this particular image, that was not a big deal because I was able to cut out some parts that were somewhat distracting on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side of the image. If we go back and look at the previous image, you can see that I have some distracting elements over here on the left-hand side. I had a rock. On the right-hand side, I had the beginnings of one of the stands that the fishermen hang on to. So that cropping allowed me to get rid of those distracting elements. So that worked well in this case. However, in this next image, again, I'm shooting this eagle in Alaska and I'm handheld. And I wasn't paying as much attention to my horizon, to trying to keep those horizons straight. So again, in the digital darkroom, I can go ahead and try to straighten that horizon. And I do that here pretty effectively. But look what happened down at at the water. I actually had to crop in kind of a little too close for comfort for me. I would have liked to have a little bit more water there to ground the image out, but because of the cropping that I had to do, because my horizon wasn't straight, I lost some of that. So the image still works, but I would have preferred to have a little more room in the bottom of the image. And that's what I suffer from by having to do a straightening for an image that was so off kilter. So make sure that your images are as level as possible when you're pushing that shutter to try to get the image as close to what you want it to be in its final form. So mistake number 3 is not checking your depth of field. This is one of the fastest ways to ruin what could be an epic image. And today this is very easy to do, to inspect the near and far elements of an image to make sure that they're nice in focus. When we shot film, that was a totally different story. We had to consult tables or do math to find the hyperfocal distance, focus on the right element, have the right depth of field, and we didn't know how we did until the film came back. Nowadays with digital, we can check this very quickly and easily by playing back the image, zooming in on those far elements and those near elements and make sure they're in focus, and if not, increase our depth of field. Sometimes when we're shooting something that the near part of the image, the near elements and the far elements are far apart, you cannot get enough depth of field to cover everything and make everything sharp. So what you may need to do is some focus stacking. And the way that you do that is you bracket the image with a focus point in different parts of the image, and then you merge those images back on the digital darkroom, whether it's with Photoshop or dedicated photo stacking tools that exist out there. Yeah, it's not as easy as doing that on the field, but oftentimes it's the only way that you can do that. And I'm going to show you an example. We're going to go back to my image from Mount Rainier. Beautiful image here. And what we're going to do is we're going to inspect our far objects, looking at the mountain and the pine trees. Those look nice and sharp. Now let's look at my near objects, the flowers down here. And I can see that those are a little bit out of focus. So I didn't have enough depth of field in order to get everything in the scene in focus. So the way that I did that, if we look at my resulting image, my actually final image, if we zoom in on the mountain, it's nice and, let's wait for Lightroom to finish rendering this image. Now everything is nice in focus. And then if I look at the flowers, they're really nice in focus. And the way that I accomplished that is by shooting a focus bracket. I focused on the mountains, took one shot while the camera was on a tripod without moving, focused on the pine trees on the far end of the pond, did another shot, focused on this tree on the right hand side and then on the close edge of the pond, took another shot, did the same thing with the reflection, and probably did 2 more shots down in the flowers. The whole time the camera was locked down. It didn't move. I just changed the focus point and focused on different elements in the scene, and then brought those into Photoshop and did a focus stacking. If at some point you want to learn how to do focus stacking in Photoshop, let me know down in the comments on this video, and I'll be happy to give you guys a little quick tutorial. Okay, now let's take a look at mistake number 4. And that is not checking your edges. And what I mean by that is not checking the edges around of your frame, the image or of your composition. This is the best advice I could give to anybody. And it is to, just before you press that shutter, take your eye and run it around the edge of the frame. Just very quickly, run it around the edge of the frame. And that's going to do a couple things for you. It is going to allow you to make sure that you include all the elements you mean to include. For example, you're not cutting off someone's feet or the legs of some animal that you're trying to shoot, or the roots of a tree. The other thing that it does is allows you to make sure that you are not including anything you don't mean to include. You don't have a branch coming in that's ruining your shot. But the other thing that it does is that it actually engages your peripheral vision once again. You know, the human eye is an incredible thing in that when we're looking at a scene, we will focus on a particular subject, the main subject of our scene, and everything else in that scene kind of melts away. You know, you've seen shots like that where there's a telephone pole coming out of someone's head, or there's someone photobombing the image and you didn't even see it. when you took it. And that's because your eye is focused on that main subject. But by running your eye along the edge of the frame very quickly, you re-engage that peripheral vision and you'll be able to see those items once more. Trust me, this is something that at the beginning is going to seem kind of difficult and tedious to do, but the more you do it, the more it becomes second nature, and you just automatically do this. You don't even have to think about it. And it takes a fraction of a second to do. And your composition is going to improve tremendously if you make a habit of doing this. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. Okay, this first example, we have a blue-footed booby that I photographed in the Galapagos. And these birds are absolutely gorgeous, and they're fun to watch and to observe. So what this guy's doing here is looking straight at the camera, beautiful composition. It's got its feet up in the air, kind of displaying its feet. This is a part of behavior of what they do. They lift their feet one at a time, kind of slowly, to show the females their bright blue feet, which is what attracts them. I got a beautiful out of focus background, but if we look here on the left, you can see that I cut off the tail feathers. You know, this image could be a 10, but it's like a 9 now, or maybe an 8 or 7, because I cut off that tip of the tail. You know, I should have been paying a little bit more attention. Maybe in the heat of the moment, I didn't see it. And yes, I could in the digital darkroom add that tip back in and expand my canvas a little bit out. But, you know, I don't typically do that much editing in the digital darkroom. I don't like to go ahead and add elements that were not there. So for me, this is a missed opportunity because I did not heed my own advice and run my eye along the edge of the frame to make sure that I was including everything in the frame. Now let's take another example of this. And this is, like I mentioned before, re-engaging that peripheral vision by moving your eye along the edge of the frame. Here I am shooting some gannets in a courting ritual in a field of gannets. There are hundreds and hundreds of gannets. These were 2 within this field of gannets that were courting. And I like this image because it's nice and clean. There's not distracting elements. You see a bunch of other gannets, but they're not drawing your eye away from your main subject, which is the 2 gannets engaged in a courtship ritual. Now, another image similar to this, you know, and just that took place a few seconds later, you know, I was not engaging my peripheral vision, if you will, and I had a bunch of distracting elements in the scene that had I noticed those, I wouldn't even have taken this image. I have a gannet here on the left in which this face is very visible. It draws away from the 2 gannets in the middle. I have a gannet chick here on the lower right, which has its beak kind of poking up, again distracting me from my main subjects that are in the scene. Had I engaged my peripheral vision, I would have noticed those and maybe wouldn't have even taken this shot. Okay, let's go on to our last one. Mistake number 5, not being there at the right time. Don't miss the best light. You want to be there early, right? And there's more than just light that we're going to talk about here, but light is, you know, probably the most important ingredient of photography. So you want to be there early. You don't want to show up at a particular location right at sunset or sunrise or 5 minutes before sunrise. The best light is usually 20 minutes before the sunrise actually happens. So I like to be there at the very least 1 hour before sunrise in most cases. Then once I'm there, I want to be patient. I want to wait for the light, wait for the opportunity, wait for the animals to show up, wait for the action to take place. That's why I'm here. Also, when you go to a particular location, the first couple of times you may be there, the light may not cooperate. Your subjects may not cooperate. So it may be that you have to go there 3, 4, 5 times until everything comes together for you and allows you to make those epic images. So be patient and then be there late. I can't tell you the number of times that I've been in a particular location, either sunrise or sunset, where just after the sun rose, 5 minutes later, 90% of the photographers left and I stayed behind, and the best light came in after that because maybe there was some cloud cover, something happened in the scene where the best light came in. Yes, I know in the morning especially we're all eager to go grab some breakfast, maybe some coffee after shooting, but trust me, I can't tell you the number of times where the best light or the best conditions occurred half an hour after sunrise. Stick around for a little bit longer and stay there. Now, let's take a couple of images. I'm going to show you a couple of other examples as to why being there at the right time is so important. In this situation here, this is Yellowstone in the winter. I wanted to capture this phenomenon, this frost on the trees is called hoarfrost. And it happens because there is a thermal creek right below it, a creek that water is warmed up by thermal features in Yellowstone. And during the night, if it's cold enough out, that steam rises and clings onto those branches of those trees and creates this beautiful hoarfrost. Now, you need to be there before the sunrise happens. You need to be there before, a little bit before that at least, not only to capture the nice light, but once that sun hits that tree, it starts melting that hoarfrost. It doesn't matter if it's 20 below, which is what it was in this situation. It was 20 something below zero. That sun, as soon as it starts hitting that tree, starts losing all that frost, all that beautiful detail. So you want to be there at the right time, even before the right time, so you get yourself ready and you're ready to photograph the main event, which in this case is this tree. So you want to be there when the temperatures are right. You want to be when the temperatures are below or 10 below or 20 below. You want to be there for the first light to make sure that the hoarfrost is still there and it hasn't melted out. Plus you get the nice golden light, side light on your subject. Another situation here where being there at the right time makes all the difference in the world, and being patient. This is in Bosque del Apache. This was about an hour and a half after sunset where we got the second glow of light. And you can tell this is pretty dark and pretty late because there's quite a bit of motion blur on the birds. I think this was a 2 to 3 second exposure. But we got lucky and we got this beautiful golden light with over these clouds reflecting in the water. By far, most of the photographers, 99 of the photographers had gone away and missed this shot completely because they weren't patient enough to wait and see what the weather was going to do. Here's another situation where waiting for the right moment makes all the sense in the world. As you saw the pictures earlier of the gannet, I wanted to get the gannet coming in kind of to tell a story. One gannet finding another gannet to come in and then establish a courtship ritual, and so I could photograph that courtship display. And being here and waiting for the right moment, being patient, being at the right place when all the gannets are congregating together for breeding is super important. So being there at the right time is insanely important. And this is something that I see all the time. People showing up to locations as sunrise is happening or as sunset is happening, and then they have to get their camera gear set up, or they go to a location and they don't have the patience to sit around and wait for action to happen or start thinking of what subjects to photograph. Okay, let's review our top 5 mistakes. Not moving around. Make sure that you move around as much as possible. Try to get different perspectives. Be like a busy bee. Move around to different locations, different heights, different perspectives. Not keeping your camera level. Very important as well. Whether you're on a tripod or handheld, try to keep that camera level. Engage those rule of thirds lines in your viewfinder to be able to help you keep that camera level at all times. Check your depth of field, especially for landscape photography, but also for wildlife. Oftentimes we want that background to be blurry, but we still want to have some detail there so we can establish environment. So making sure that your depth of field is set correctly for what you're trying to convey. Checking your edges. Make sure that you check those edges, that you don't cut off the hooves or the feet or the legs of your subjects, for example, or that you don't cut off a branch or the top of a mountain. I've seen that too, where folks who are not paying attention, they cut off the peak of a mountain. Make sure that you check those edges and engage that peripheral vision. And not being there at the right time. Showing up at the last minute showing up in the winter to Yellowstone, wondering why the elk are not bugling. That's not their time of the year when they do that. Understanding where you're going, being there at the right time, actually being early in patience is key. Well, I hope these tips will help your photography. If so, I would appreciate if you subscribe to my channel and hit that little bell so that you get notified when I post new videos. I'll be posting a lot more videos in the coming weeks and months, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of them. And if you enjoy this, I would appreciate it if you could share it with your friends so that more people get to learn and enjoy their photography even more. Take care. Until next time.